Welcome to the mansion of midnight mysteries.
The buried truth. Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the shadows dancing on the walls like specters of her past. It had been 6 months since she lost Steve, her husband, in a tragic accident. The world felt heavy, and the silence in the house was deafening. She often found herself staring at the empty chair across from her, wishing for just one more moment with him. Suddenly, Sarah felt a chill creep into her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the cold that seemed to seep into her very soul. Then, she heard a soft whisper, barely audible. "Sarah." Her heart raced. "Steve?" She called out, her voice trembling. The room was still, but she felt a presence, a warmth that enveloped her like a familiar embrace. "Is that you?" "Sarah, you need to listen to me," the voice urged, echoing in her mind. "Michael is not who you think he is." Sarah's heart sank. Michael was their mutual friend, someone who had been supportive since Steve's death. "What do you mean?" she whispered, fear creeping into her heart. "He knows about the photos," Steve's voice warned. "You have to be careful. He's coming for you." The words sent a shiver down her spine. "Photos? What photos?" She had no idea what Steve was talking about. The memories of their life together were clouded by grief, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Just then, a knock echoed through the house, startling her. Sarah hesitated, her heart racing. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Michael, his expression unreadable. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. "Michael, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wanted to check on you," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I was worried. You've been so isolated since, you know." "Thanks, but I'm fine," Sarah replied, closing the door behind him. She felt a wave of unease wash over her as he looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the empty chair where Steve used to sit. "Are you sure?" "You shouldn't be alone," Michael said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. "I know how hard this has been for you." "Really, I'm okay," Sarah insisted, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. "I just need some time." Michael's expression shifted, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. "You can't keep hiding from the past, Sarah. You need to face it." "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart pounding. "What past?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know about the things you and Steve did. The people you hurt. The secrets you buried." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, confusion and fear swirling within her. "You're scaring me." "Don't play innocent with me," Michael said, his tone darkening. "I know about the photos. The evidence of your crimes. You think you can just forget? You think you can hide?" Panic surged through Sarah. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We didn't do anything," she shouted, her voice trembling. Michael stepped back, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You really don't remember, do you?" The people who disappeared? The memories flooded back, but they were hazy, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. She and Steve had always been so careful, so meticulous. But the thought of what he was implying sent a wave of nausea through her. "Stop it," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "You're lying. You're just trying to scare me." "Am I?" Michael challenged, his voice low and menacing. "You think Steve is gone? You think he can't protect you anymore? But I know the truth, Sarah. And I'm going to make sure everyone else knows it too." In that moment, the room felt suffocating. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the danger she was in. "Get out," she demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. Michael stepped closer, his eyes glinting with malice. "You can't just push me away. I'm the only one who can help you. But you have to be willing to face the truth." "Leave me alone," she shouted, backing away. She felt the weight of the memories pressing down on her, the shadows of her past creeping closer. Michael's expression hardened, and he took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "You think you can just bury the truth and it will stay hidden? I know what you and Steve did, and I won't let you forget it. Get out!" Sarah screamed, her voice echoing in the small room. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to protect herself. She turned and ran toward the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. "Where are you going?" Michael called after her, his voice dripping with mockery. "You can't escape the truth, Sarah." She reached for the kitchen knife, her hands trembling as she gripped the handle. The cold steel felt reassuring against her palm. She turned to face him, her breath coming in quick gasps. "Stay back, Michael. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Michael laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You think you can threaten me? You're the one with blood on your hands, not me. You're the one who should be afraid." "Stop it," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You don't know what you're talking about. We didn't hurt anyone." "Didn't you?" he taunted, stepping closer. "You and Steve were a perfect team. You thought you could get away with it, but I know everything. I know about the bodies buried in your garden, and I know about the photos that prove it." Sarah's mind raced. She had no idea what he was talking about. The memories of her life with Steve were clouded by grief, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. "What photos?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "The ones that show you two in the act," Michael said, his voice low and sinister. "The ones that will ruin you. I have a copy, and I'm not afraid to use it." Panic surged through her. "You're lying. You're just trying to manipulate me," she shouted, but doubt gnawed at her insides. What if there was some truth to his words? What if Steve had hidden something from her? "Am I?" Michael stepped closer, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. "You think you can keep living in this fantasy? You think you can pretend that everything is fine? I'm here to wake you up, Sarah." In that moment, Sarah felt a surge of anger. "You're the one who needs to leave. You're not my friend, you're a monster." She brandished the knife, her hands shaking but her resolve hardening. Michael's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You think you can scare me? You think you can threaten me with that?" He laughed again, but this time it was tinged with something darker. "You're just a scared little girl playing with a toy." "Get out," she screamed, her voice breaking. "I'll call the police." Go ahead, he said, stepping back but not breaking eye contact. But they won't believe you. Not when I show them the evidence. You're in this alone, Sarah. The weight of his words pressed down on her, and for a moment she felt utterly trapped. But then a flicker of determination ignited within her. I won't let you intimidate me, she said, her voice steadier now. I'll find out the truth, and I'll make sure you pay for what you've done. Michael's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. You think you can fight me? You think you can uncover the truth without consequences? You're playing a dangerous game, Sarah. Maybe, she replied, her heart racing. But I'd rather face the truth than live in fear of you. With that, she turned and dashed toward the back door, her heart pounding in her chest. She flung it open and stepped into the darkened garden, the rain-soaked earth squelching beneath her feet. The moonlight illuminated the area where she and Steve had spent countless evenings, but now it felt like a graveyard of secrets. Where are you going? Michael shouted, following her into the night. You can't escape. I'm not running, she yelled back, her voice echoing in the stillness. I'm going to find out what's buried here. She knelt down in the garden, her hands trembling as she began to dig. The earth was soft and wet, and she felt a surge of adrenaline as she clawed at the ground, desperate to uncover the truth. Memories flooded her mind, laughter, love, and the darkness that had crept into their lives. As Sarah dug deeper, her hands became caked with mud, but she pressed on, fueled by a mix of fear and determination. Rain began to fall, soaking her clothes and mingling with the dirt beneath her nails. She could hear Michael's footsteps behind her, the sound growing closer, but she couldn't stop now. She had to know. Stop this, Sarah. Michael shouted, his voice laced with frustration. You're only making things worse for yourself. Ignoring him, she continued to dig, her heart racing as she unearthed a small, weathered box. It was half buried, the wood rotting and covered in grime. She pulled it free, her breath hitching in her throat. This had to be it, the evidence, the truth she had been searching for. Open it, Michael urged, his voice now a low growl. You really want to know what's inside? You think you can handle it? With trembling hands, Sarah brushed the dirt off the box and fumbled with the latch. It creaked open, revealing a collection of photographs, each one more chilling than the last. Sarah's heart sank as she pulled out the first photo, her breath catching in her throat. It was a picture of Steve, smiling, but behind him lay a shadowy figure, someone she recognized. The next photo showed a dark alley, and in the background, she could make out a body, partially obscured by shadows. Panic surged through her as she flipped through the images, each one depicting moments she had never known about, moments that revealed a sinister side to the man she loved. Do you see now? Michael's voice was a low whisper, filled with triumph. You thought you could bury the past, but it's all right here. You and Steve were a team, and now you're left holding the bag. No, Sarah gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be real. Steve wouldn't, he couldn't have done this. Open your eyes, Sarah. Michael shouted, stepping closer, his face twisted with a mix of anger and satisfaction. He was a monster, and you were complicit. You can't deny it any longer. The weight of his words pressed down on her, and she felt the ground beneath her shift. I didn't know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I thought we were happy. I thought we were safe. Safe? Michael laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the night. You were living a lie. And now, it's time for you to face the truth. You can't hide from what you've done. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued to sift through the photographs, each one revealing a darker reality. There were images of people she recognized, friends, acquaintances, each one marked by a fate she had never imagined. The last photo made her stomach turn. It was a picture of her, standing in the garden, blissfully unaware of the horrors that had unfolded around her. "Look at you," Michael said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You were right there, Sarah. You were part of it all. And now, you're the only one left to carry the burden." "No," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't do anything. I loved him. I trusted him." "Love doesn't absolve you of guilt," he replied, his tone cold. "You can't escape the truth. And now that I have this evidence, I can make sure everyone knows what you and Steve really are." Sarah felt a surge of desperation. "You can't do this. You're my friend. You're supposed to help me." "Help you?" Michael scoffed. "You're beyond help. You need to pay for what you've done, and I'm the one who's going to make sure that happens." In that moment, Sarah realized the depth of Michael's betrayal. He had been playing her all along, using her grief to manipulate her. She felt a surge of anger rise within her, pushing back against the fear that had consumed her. "No," she said, her voice steadying. "I won't let you do this. I won't let you take my life away." Michael stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "What are you going to do? You think you can fight me? You're just a scared woman with a shovel." With a sudden burst of courage, Sarah stood up, clutching the box of photographs tightly. "I may be scared, but I'm not powerless. You think you can intimidate me? You think you can control me? I won't let you." She turned and ran, the box clutched to her chest as she dashed toward the house. The rain poured down, soaking her to the bone, but she didn't care. She had to get away from him, away from the truth that threatened to consume her. "Sarah, come back!" Michael shouted, his voice echoing in the night. "You can't run from this." But she didn't stop. She burst through the back door and slammed it shut behind her, locking it with trembling hands. She leaned against the door, her heart racing as she tried to catch her breath. The photographs felt heavy in her hands, a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. As she stood there, the reality of what she had uncovered began to sink in. Steve had hidden a dark secret, and now it was threatening to unravel everything she thought she knew. But she couldn't let Michael win. She had to find a way to protect herself, to confront the truth without letting it destroy her. Suddenly, she heard a loud bang against the door, followed by Michael's voice, filled with rage. "You can't hide forever, Sarah. I will find you." Panic surged through her, and she knew she had to act fast. She glanced around the room, and her eyes landed on the phone on the kitchen counter. She dashed toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached for the phone, another loud bang reverberated through the house, shaking the door on its hinges. "Sarah, open the door!" Michael shouted, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't keep this from me." Ignoring him, she grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number, her fingers trembling as she pressed the buttons. Please pick up," she whispered, her heart racing. The line rang, and she could hear Michael's voice growing louder, pounding against the door. "Sarah, you're making a mistake. You don't want to do this," he yelled, but she focused on the ringing phone, praying for someone to answer. Finally, a calm voice came through the line. "What's your emergency? Please, I need help." Sarah cried, her voice breaking. My friend is trying to break into my house. I think he knows something about my husband, and I'm scared. Stay calm, the operator said. Can you tell me your address? As she recited her address, she could hear Michael's relentless pounding on the door, his voice growing more frantic. You can't call the police, Sarah. You don't know what you're doing. They won't believe you. Just stay on the line, the operator instructed. Help is on the way. Can you find a safe place to hide? Sarah glanced around the kitchen, her mind racing. She spotted the pantry door and quickly moved toward it, her heart pounding. I'm going to hide, she whispered into the phone. Please hurry. Stay quiet and keep the line open, the operator said. Help will be there soon. She slipped into the pantry, closing the door behind her and holding her breath. The darkness enveloped her, and she could hear her heart pounding in her ears. The sound of Michael's voice echoed through the house, a mix of anger and desperation. Sarah, you can't hide from me. I know you're in there, he shouted, his voice growing more frantic. You're making a huge mistake. Just let me in, and we can talk about this. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching the box of photographs tightly to her chest. The weight of the evidence felt like a leaden anchor, a reminder of the darkness that had seeped into her life. She had to stay strong. She had to protect herself. Minutes felt like hours as she waited in the darkness, the sound of Michael's voice growing more distant. She could hear him pacing outside, muttering to himself, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What had Steve done? What had she been a part of? Suddenly, she heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Relief flooded through her, but it was quickly followed by a surge of fear. What would happen when the police arrived? Would they believe her? Would they see her as a victim or a suspect? Sarah! Michael shouted again, his voice now tinged with desperation. You don't want to do this. You're only making it worse for yourself. The sirens grew closer, and she could hear the sound of a car skidding to a stop outside. Please let them be here, she whispered, her heart racing. The sound of footsteps approached the front door, and she held her breath, praying that it was the police. She could hear voices outside, muffled but authoritative. Police! Open up, one of them shouted. Thank God, she breathed, feeling a flicker of hope. But then she heard Michael's voice again, low and menacing. You think they'll help you? They don't know the truth, Sarah. They don't know what you've done. The door burst open, and she heard the police officers enter the house. Show me your hands, one of them shouted. We're here to help. Help me. Sarah cried, her voice breaking. He's in the house. He's trying to hurt me. Stay where you are, the officer commanded, and she could hear them moving through the house, searching for Michael. Sarah, you're making a mistake. Michael shouted, his voice filled with rage. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to regret this. The officers moved closer, and she could hear them shouting for Michael to come out. We know you're in here. You need to surrender. Sarah, don't listen to them. Michael yelled, his voice echoing through the house. They're lying to you. You're the one who should be afraid. Suddenly, she heard a scuffle, followed by a loud crash and the sound of footsteps rushing toward the pantry. Sarah, one of the officers called out, his voice urgent. Are you in there? We need you to come out. She hesitated for a moment, fear gripping her. What if Michael was right? What if they didn't believe her? But then she remembered the photographs, the truth she had unearthed, and the danger that Michael posed. She couldn't let fear control her any longer. Taking a deep breath, she opened the pantry door and stepped out, clutching the box of photographs tightly to her chest. The sight that greeted her was chaotic. 2 officers stood in the living room, their hands on their weapons, while another officer was grappling with Michael, who was struggling against their hold. "Sarah, help me!" Michael shouted, his eyes wild with desperation. "They're trying to frame me. You know I'm your friend." "Stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking but resolute. "He's lying. He's not my friend. He's been threatening me." The officers exchanged glances, and one of them stepped forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, we need you to stay calm. Can you tell us what's going on?" She nodded, her heart racing as she glanced at Michael, who was still trying to break free. "He knows about the things Steve and I did. He's been trying to manipulate me, and I think he has evidence, photos that prove what we did." "Photos?" the officer asked, his brow furrowing. "What kind of photos?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she opened the box and pulled out the first photograph. "These," she said, holding it up for them to see. "They show Steve and me and the people we hurt." The officers exchanged looks of concern as they examined the photo. "Where did you find these?" one of them asked. "In the garden," she replied, her voice shaking. "I didn't know they existed. I thought we were happy. I thought we were safe." Michael's expression shifted from anger to desperation. "You can't believe her. She's trying to frame me. I'm the one who's been helping her." "Enough," the officer shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're not here to play games. We need to get this under control." As the officers continued to restrain Michael, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had taken a stand, and now the truth was finally coming to light. But the weight of the photographs still hung heavy in her hands, a reminder of the darkness that had seeped into her life. "Sarah, please," Michael pleaded, his voice rising in pitch. "You don't want to do this. You don't know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm getting into," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm taking back my life." The officers finally managed to subdue Michael, handcuffing him and pulling him away from the living room. "You're under arrest for threatening behavior and harassment," one of them said, his tone firm. "You have the right to remain silent." As they led Michael out of the house, he turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with rage. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You think you can escape the truth? You're just as guilty as I am." "Get him out of here," she shouted, her heart racing. She felt a mix of fear and anger, but she refused to let him intimidate her any longer. Once Michael was gone, the officers turned their attention back to Sarah. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, concern etched on his face. "Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice shaking. I need to understand what's happening. I didn't know about the photos. I didn't know what Steve was involved in." The officer nodded, his expression sympathetic. "We'll need to take a statement from you. But first, let's get you somewhere safe." As they led her outside, the rain had stopped, and the moonlight illuminated the garden where she had unearthed the box of photographs. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She had faced the darkness, and while the path ahead was uncertain, she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. The truth was out, and she was ready to confront whatever came next. As the officers took her statement, Sarah felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She would honor Steve's memory, but she would also confront the reality of their past. She would no longer be a prisoner of fear or guilt. And as she looked up at the night sky, she whispered a silent promise to herself. I will find the strength to face this.